Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Weapon Hex. She is the character that got the seasonal uniform this year, which was a little bit unexpected considering that she isn't really too popular or well known. She's a mashup character, but at the same time, she was on that list of characters that would get an upgrade probably by this year. I've seen people be on the fence on whether to pick up Weapon Hex because they're not sure if she will provide value to the roster. She doesn't provide a clear-cut improvement like Ghost Rider did, because Ghost Rider had an amazing upgrade where he provided value to pretty much everyone since he could function at a high level both in PvE and PvP. Weapon Hex, on the other hand, can function in PvE and does kind of excel in PvP, but her main value is that she provides very crazy specialized buffs to a certain set of characters, the ones that are zombie tagged, and it's kind of difficult to tell whether she has enough value for most players now as opposed to later, because it really depends on how many zombie character or zombie tagged characters they add in the near future. Despite that, I'm going to show you how the character performs in PvE and PvP so you can get a better idea if she will be valuable for your account. Just for reference, I'm using a mighty CTP of Conquest on the character, so all the testing is done without a damage proc. And I did actually end up lucking out and getting her 6-star artifact, so I have a pretty maxed out build for her. I have that, as well as Odin's pretty much on every slot. If you want to build a character specifically for PvE, I would probably recommend something like a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction. She is really proc friendly. You can also go with a CTP of Rage like every character, but she won't really be used in things like ABX. You can potentially use her on the Blast Villain Day, but there are better options, so you're probably better off just using her for things like World Boss Legend if you're trying to push to those higher stages that have the specific restrictions that she satisfies. From my initial testing of the character at level 70 and 80, she doesn't seem to be anything too special for PvE. I was able to take down stage 35 of Null without using any leadership or supports besides her own self-support, and did that with about 60 seconds left. If the character was to excel in PvE like World Boss Legend, she likely would have completed this with around 1 minute and 30 seconds left at the very least for my account. One of the nice things I noticed about her kit for PvE is that she is fairly tanky, she has high damage reduction, and has passive healing, and on top of that, you don't really have to worry about the boss kind of jumping around and avoiding your attacks by going into iframe, because you're going to finish off your rotation with the 4th skill, which has iframe ignore. On top of that, her rotation is very easy to do since you can quick cancel pretty much all of the skills. Similar to other characters, by taking her to level 80, I was able to shave off around 2 minutes from the clear time. Because the clear time for the lower stages is so quick, I had to go to a higher stage to get a better representation of her improvement when she gets to tier 4. So I pushed to stage 54, again without using leadership and supports, and she again was able to clear this with roughly around 60 seconds remaining. To make sure I get a more consistent result or range in terms of the improvement, I also did a stage 40 of King. This time I did use a leadership and support since it's a pretty tough stage for a character at level 80, and wanted to see how quickly she could complete the first phase, which she did with around 1 minute and 30 seconds left. If you decide to tier 4 the character, she gets pretty good stat increases for a blast type. Her HP increases closer to the 40,000 range, which is pretty good because blast types don't increase too much for HP. Mine is around 36,000 of an improvement, and her energy attack does increase by a pretty solid amount, around 15,000 at least for my account. It's also worth noting that the tier 4 skill does improve her PvE performance by quite a bit, considering that it adds 30% chain hit damage and 60% energy attack at the max level. For the striker, you can use whichever one has the matching instinct type or some of the proven ones like Ghost Rider and Thor, and similarly you can do the same thing for PvP. You can use some of the top strikers there, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Spider-Man, or if you're out of characters that have the iframe ignore as strikers to add there, you can just use ones that have that 100% damage increase and have the matching instinct type. The one that I used, for example, is Angel. With the tier 4 upgrade, I was able to clear the same stage of Null around 1 minute and 10 seconds faster than I did before. To get an even better representation of the clear time improvement with the tier 4, I saw that on stage 40 of Kang, I was able to clear the first phase, this time roughly around 2 minutes faster than before. So by taking these two samples, it's reasonable to assume that the tier 4 upgrade for weapon hex is roughly around anywhere from 1 minute and 30 to 2 minutes on the upper end, depending on the bosses that you fight because of the different kind of animations and wait times and things like that. The rotation that I used for weapon hex is pretty straightforward. You do a 1 and 2 cancel to fill up the tier 4 skill, and then you do a 3 cancel 5 cancel 4. Once you have your awakening skill, you simply cancel that at the beginning and do the same rotation of 3 cancel 5 cancel 4. By gaining access to the tier 4 skill, weapon hex does significantly improve in PvE and kind of does go above the average for PvE performance, especially because she is also a mutant character and a villain character that can utilize some pretty great supports in some of the higher World Boss Legend stages. You can obviously see that the character is pretty good now in PvE with that tier 4, since I essentially was able to clear stage 40 of Kang with no damage proc. If you watched my Apocalypse video, he wasn't even able to clear stage 39 and ran out of time with 16 health bars left, and that's a native tier 2 character. As I mentioned previously, weapon hex won't really be used in ABX because there are just far better options like Magneto and Doctor Strange, and because she doesn't really have the cancel effects for the different seasons. So you're going to have to either swap if you don't have her tier 4, or compromise your tier 4 to get that cancel effect and potentially lower your score. That being said, if you have Doctor Strange's latest zombie uniform and don't have some of the other supports for him that are kind of better options, then you can actually use weapon hex on the team to provide support for Doctor Strange. Regardless, if you want to know how the character scores, I was able to hit around 8.6 million by having to swap out to get the cancel effect, so not really that great. But once I got the character to tier 4, her score skyrocketed for 2 reasons. One of them was that I could spam the striker skill to increase my hits and overall score, as well as gaining that crazy chain hit damage increase and energy attack increase. But more importantly, I could also use a striker that had the cancel effect for the season, which also allowed me to add in another better support. So with all of that, I was able to increase my overall score by roughly around 3.4 million, and ended up reaching 12 million with her. So weapon hex's performance in PvE is good. It isn't anything crazy or exceptional, but obviously her main focus based on her kit is PvP, because she has that damage reduction, she has iframe ignore, passive healing, and she has those crazy support buffs not only for herself but other zombie tag characters that provide that debuff cleanse, as well as providing that 7 seconds of pseudo kind of immortality, I want to say, because she ends up dying after the 7 seconds, as opposed to the traditional kind of immortal effect, where after 7 seconds they heal back up and can just resume as normal. You can see from these clips that even though weapon hex is still level 80, she is capable of taking out tier 4 meta characters, or at least one life of them, and often does that with just one skill. After several tests, I noticed that weapon hex does noticeably improve in PvP when you tier 4 her. The increased energy attack means that she can more consistently one-shot opponents with her 4th skill, but more importantly, the increased HP means that she can survive longer by healing more, either passively or from her 5th skill, and refrain from having that death throes or immortal effect activate early. So that means that if she can survive longer to activate that 4th skill more often, that can potentially one-shot, she can take out more meta characters. So where she could previously take out one life of characters like Silver Surfer or Sentry, she can at tier 4 more consistently take out both of their lives and potentially another character in things like Timeline. But I have noticed that she is pretty susceptible to reflect damage. The 4th skill is an iframe only at the start, and afterwards she's basically just standing there attacking, so characters like Silver Surfer can pretty easily take her out, or at least trigger her death throes effect. The AI rotation is also good. It opens with the 4th skill, which is her most important one. It has that iframe ignore on it, as well as providing her with 40% penetration to all sources, invincible, damage proc, and also locking down the opponent with super guard break. After that, the AI usually rotates into the 5th skill, which provides her with healing, more of an attack proc increase or attack increase, and a lot of CC effects to further lock down the opponent. It could be even better if it went into the 3rd skill too, which provides her with the damage accumulation, but rotating between the 4th and 5th skill seems to work pretty well for her most of the time. You can see from this clip that I was almost able to take out a full meta team with just weapon hacks, but luckily because she also provides passive to other zombie characters, you can potentially make a zombie team work in timeline, probably to a lesser extent than stacking it up with other meta characters, but it can work and could be pretty interesting in the future. Regarding her build options, the most viable ones are either a CTP of Conquest or a CTP of Greed. If you go the CTP of Conquest route, it makes her perform better versus the kind of sub metas or ones that are like a little bit lower in the meta, because they'll have more difficulty taking her out and reaching that death throes effect to be able to kill her. She synergizes very well with the CTP of Conquest because she has active healing, passive healing, high damage reduction, and immediately goes into invincible with the 5th skill, and often hides in some partial iframes with the 4th and 5th skill. Because the character opens with the 4th skill that has that super guard break, the damage proc, and high damage burst on it, and because she also has that kind of immortal effect or sticks around longer, a CTP of Greed is also a very viable option if you want to quickly burst down the opponent and potentially take out some top metas right away to at least wipe them for things like Alliance Conquest, if not completely kill them if they come back and you're still able to proc it again to take out their second life. It's difficult for me to recommend just one of those options overall since I need more long-term testing, but I would say either of them are fine. If you're considering alternative options like a CTP of Authority, Refinement, or Regen, I would say that a CTP of Authority might be your safest bet. It's not as good as the Conquest because she opens with the Invincible, so you're not getting much out of that, but you can potentially get good synergy with that steel proc activating with her own damage reduction. The CTP Refinement isn't as good because you don't have guard break immunity, so it means that you can potentially be locked out from having burst from the 4th skill at the start, and a CTP of Regen isn't as good because you don't have super guard break immunity, meaning that if you go into that death throes effect, you could be potentially locked down and not be able to do anything with your 4th skill. However, if you want to use weapon hex in a more hybrid kind of support capacity, you can use a CTP of Regen with that penetration effect to help out Captain America more. You could also alternatively use a CTP of Liberation because it has that guard break immunity and can make her function as well. Lastly, you can obviously also use a CTP of Insight, but if you're going to use Falcon, you might consider wanting to put it on him instead, since Weapon Hex has more viability as a solo character. If you decide to play Weapon Hex on manual, you want to have at least one character at the start where you can avoid some of the burst attacks. Then after they die or you switch them out, you go into Weapon Hex and immediately go into your 4th skill. This will basically one-shot any of the characters, even if you don't have a damage proc, or should get them close enough for you to finish them off. When they respawn, you just move around kind of a little bit further away so that you have enough time for your 4th to come back off cooldown, and you do the same thing. From there, you rotate into your 5th skill to get the healing from it, and when your 4th and 5th skill are both on cooldown, you typically want to go into the 2nd skill because it is a full iframe and you can drag out the timer for your 4th and 5th skill. You always want to use your 4th skill when it's available so that you can super guard break the opponent and burst them down with the iframe ignore. It's going to be tricky to take out all of the characters with her because the other characters that spawn in will immediately go into things like iframe ignore skills, but because she provides passive buffs to zombies characters, and if you're using a full zombie team, you can just clean up the rest with Captain America. The obvious team to use Weapon Hex with is Captain America's Leadership and Falcon because they all support one another, and because they're all villain types now, I wanted to see if Captain America can more consistently take out Thanos because he also has benefits versus villain types. And you can see here that the buffs to Captain America were enough, and that Weapon Hex's survival and burst damage was enough to take out both the immortality effect of Hela, as well as take out Thanos with his constant iframe ignore spam. I also wanted to clarify how the Death Throes effect works in Alliance Conquest. If you end up activating the Death Throes effect in the first fight, but the fight ends before the timer on the buff ends, then it won't carry over into the second fight, meaning that you'll just start that fight off at 1 health, but won't immediately end up dying or end up dying after 7 seconds. You'll just start at 1 health and fight normally. However, the Death Throes effect won't activate again, which is kind of the typical behavior with other effects as well. You don't have Revive activating a second time or Immortal activating a second time anymore. So you saw from that screenshot that the fight ended with 5 seconds remaining when the fight ended. And in the second fight, you can see that that buff did not carry over, nor did it reactivate. The fight continued for 7 seconds and the characters were still alive and just ended up healing back up normally. Even though I was hoping to showcase Weapon Hex a little bit more, it seems that the buffs from her and Falcon kind of supercharged Captain America and made him a really strong option for Alliance Conquest. And I also noticed that even with Mighty Conquest, Weapon Hex doesn't tend to survive too long if you face meta characters, because again, that 4th skill, even though it has an iframe at the start of it, it typically just goes out of it afterwards, allowing her to take a lot of damage, and that's kind of where she drops into that Death Throes effect, which might mean that a CTP of Greed could potentially be a more viable option over the Conquest, but again, I would need more testing to figure that out. I know I likely wasn't going to win this fight, but I wanted to see how they would fare against them. Surprisingly enough, they triggered Wolverine's artifact and were almost able to take out Sentry, so it's possible that depending on the opponent's builds, and if you're lucky with RNG, you can potentially wipe this team, or even if you get lucky enough, potentially win it completely. So by knowing that this team can at the very least trigger Wolverine's artifact and potentially take 1 life of Sentry, one of the strategies that you can use is to use this team at the start of that fight and then put a kind of stronger meta team underneath that to basically allow for the second character to wipe that fight out completely, because all the CC effects, revives, and immortality effects have already been activated in the first fight. So in this particular example, I used the Weapon Hex Captain America Falcon team at the top to trigger all of the debuff removal effects, all the important effects, and then put Sentry with 2 support characters at the bottom to basically just clean out the rest of the teams. I know my offensive showcase for the team hasn't been that great, but I was targeting some of the stronger meta teams. The team is definitely good, and you can see here that on defense, the opponent definitely has some troubles with them. If they're probably not using meta teams themselves, they might have issues taking out the characters and have to figure out a strategy on which character to focus in terms of countering Captain America or Weapon Hex. I haven't really faced off versus this team much yet to offer reliable counters, but from what I've seen, characters that have a counter iframe ignore skill that has good burst damage on it seem to do pretty well against this team. So for example, Madeline Pryor, who is a blast type, has a type advantage versus Captain America, no type disadvantage versus Weapon Hex, and can often burst them down with the counter skill. And similarly, the same thing with Dr. Doom, having the universal typing and having a good burst damage on that counter iframe ignore skill. Depending on the characters that are buffed and debuffed in Otherworld Battle, Weapon Hex could potentially become fairly useful in the future. She already was fairly good when combat and supervillain characters were buffed in previous seasons, because she could be used in combination with Captain America, not only provided him with a damage increase and herself, but also that debuff removal passive. The fact that she could also extend both Captain America and her own life meant that you could avoid taking burst damage in the next characters that spawned in and end up having the opponent character burn through more of their CC effects before you come in with your characters and burst them down when they're kind of locked down. Overall, I think the character is fairly good. She definitely has a ton of value in PvP and has some value in PvE, at the very least as a support, but it's still difficult to recommend this character to pretty much everyone, like I did Ghost Rider, for example, because she is a little bit niche in her effects currently. It's a little bit of a gamble whether she's going to be very useful and have a lot of value in the future, because it really depends on how many zombie characters they add. If they added someone like Spider-Man, for example, as a zombie tagged character, you could potentially swap out Falcon, and then you could have a pretty annoying team for things like Alliance Conquest. and even potentially in things like Timeline. So if you're into Alliance Conquest and Otherworld Battle and have the resources to get her, then I would recommend her. But for players who aren't really worried about PvP, I don't really think she'll make much of a difference to your roster, and you can likely just skip this uniform at least for the year till we see how many more zombie characters are added for her to have more value and see if she becomes a better buy-in option at that time. I also forgot to mention this in the timeline testing, but if the opponent triggers your Death Throes effect and you decide to swap out the character, the effect won't reset. It'll basically keep ticking through the timer so that by the time that you end up swapping the character back in, it will instantly die. That pretty much does it for this one. Weapon Hex was definitely an interesting choice and interesting buffs and overall improvement for her. She might not be for everyone, but she is definitely a good character, especially if you're into PvP. But ultimately, we need to see how many more zombies they add to see just how good she will end up being. Abomination, on the other hand, isn't really worth getting in my opinion, since he doesn't really provide streamline effects to certain characters. He only really buffs up Hulk in things like ABX and ABL, doesn't really have much value outside of that. I'm pretty sure that the next update will be for Symbiotes and Nulls tier 4, so just keep an eye on your tier 4 materials till the next update drops. But if you enjoyed this video, found it entertaining or useful, please consider subscribing, liking, and potentially sharing this with others. It could help them out, and it definitely helps my channel grow. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.